Hello Walking Book Clubbers, and welcome to the webcast about H is for Hawk. So what did we think about this book, which was a surprise hit when it was published about 5 or 6 years ago? In general, we liked it, most of us. Some people really objected to it on the grounds of animal cruelty, but most of us loved the nature writing and found it a very moving exploration of grief. Some of us also did find it quite self-indulgent, but I argued the point, does a book that is explicitly about coming to terms with the loss of a parent, does it have to be quite self-indulgent? I think is maybe self-indulgent sounds too critical, but it is very self-reflexive, isn't it? So perhaps we can forgive her on that count. We started off talking about why did Helen get a hawk? So for those of you who haven't read the book, it's a strange kind of hybrid of a book. It's partly Helen Macdonald's, the author's, account of her coming to being knocked sideways by grief, the loss of her father very suddenly. And her father was a great press photographer and lived quite an exciting life and was obviously a very inspirational force to her. So she's coming to terms with that and decides to get a hawk. And in training, not just any hawk, a goshawk, and in training the goshawk, she kind of rebuilds herself. So it's part that, it's part an amazing nature writing about hawks and the sort of vicious killing that hawks do and they're soaring through the air, all that kind of stuff. And then it's also in part a biography of T.H. White, who many of you might have heard of. He wrote The Once and Future King, great Arthurian legend. He also wrote a book called Goss, which was his own account of trying to keep a goshawk. And so we learned, so it's these kind of three different strands that intertwine as we go through. So we started off saying, why did she get a hawk? What is it? It's quite funny, some people said, well, you know, she's always been interested in hawks, and if she'd worked in a dog pound, she would have got a dog. Which made me laugh, and we all agreed that she wanted something to nurture, something to love, but I think there was something more to it than that, and I think in the way she writes about hawks, there is a real link between the death that she suffered and her choice of getting a hawk. And she traced that. I'll just find the page here. She talks about the word bereavement. Sorry, I just realised I've left my postcard over there. 1 second, let me go and get it. Sorry about that, it seems to completely disappear. Oh no, here it was, here all along. Okay, so she talks about bereavement. There we go, page 13. So quite early on she says, here's a word, bereavement or bereaved, bereft. It's from the Old English bereafian. I wish someone could show me how to pronounce that correctly. Meaning to deprive of, take away, seize, rob. Robbed, seized. It happens to everyone, but you feel it alone. And she talks a bit more about what it's like to be bereaved. Then what's interesting is a few pages later, she talks about hawks and raptors and links the word raptor to the word robber. And she shows that they're kind of two sides of the same coin in a way. You know, there's being robbed and the robber. So she's been robbed and now she gets the robber to get her over this. And she also writes quite a lot about the way hawks have been thought to be able to slip into different worlds, which it's a kind of amazing topic, and she refers to some folk tales and this idea of it being able to kind of cross over into the land of death. So I do think there was something specific about it being a hawk rather than just any old animal, not just a dog, although perhaps she would have got a dog if she worked in a dog pound. So we talked a bit about that, and then we also talked about, also how the way that hawks, she describes them as such a killing machine, and I think it's that some readers really had a problem with, the kind of visceral, I suppose, nature red in tooth and claw, the kind of killing scenes, and often she has to kill the rabbit that the hawk captures. But she writes, there's this book full of killing, which obviously, given that she's just suffered a death, someone has been killed, it feels very apt. And she actually says, she just says something about all this killing makes you feel very alive. And so I thought there was something in that as well, that in her choice of getting quite a vicious animal, that life in some ways sits so closely to death. And then there's a bit that I'm going to read out. We actually read it out twice on the walk. One of the walkers sort of referred to it first and read a bit of it out, and then at our next stop I read it out again. So on page 85 to 86. And there's quite a lot in this passage, so I will do my best to read it slowly. So she says, "Nothing was wrong with the hawk. She wasn't sick. She was a baby. She fell asleep because that's what babies do. I wasn't sick either. But I was orphaned and desperately suggestible, and I didn't know what was happening to me. For years, I'd scoffed at White's notion of hawk training as a rite of passage. Overblown, I thought, loopy. Because it wasn't like that. I knew it wasn't. I'd flown scores of hawks, and every step of their training was familiar to me. But while the steps were familiar, the person taking them was not. I was in ruins. Some deep part of me was trying to rebuild itself, and its model was right there on my fist. The hawk was everything I wanted to be, solitary, self-possessed, free from grief, and numb to the hurts of human life. I was turning into a hawk." She goes on a bit, and then there's another passage just a page later on 86. She says, "To train a hawk, you must watch it like a hawk, and so you come to understand its moods. Then you gain the ability to predict what it will do next. This is the sixth sense of the practiced animal trainer. Eventually, you don't see the hawk's body language at all. You seem to feel what it feels, notice what it notices. The hawk's apprehension becomes your own. You're exercising what the poet Keats called your chameleon quality, the ability to tolerate a loss of self and a loss of rationality by trusting in the capacity to recreate oneself in another character or another environment. Such a feat of imaginative recreation has always come easily to me, too easily. It's part of being a watcher, forgetting who you are and putting yourself in the thing you are watching. That is why the girl who was me when I was small loved watching birds. She made herself disappear, and then in the birds she watched, took flight. It was happening now. I had put myself in the hawk's wild mind to tame her, and as the days passed in the darkened room, my humanity was burning away." So I think the first thing to say is, it's really exceptional writing. It's beautiful, it's quite poetic, and it's really thick with meaning. And I would hasten to add that I really love this book, and although I have aspects of it that I do feel slightly critically towards bits of it, I still think it's great. So the other thing I wanted to say is just at the beginning of that, I was really interested in the way she describes the hawk as a baby. She literally says she was a baby. She fell asleep because that's what babies do. So partly it's kind of strange that she's writing about the hawk as a baby. Also, I certainly found, as a mother of 3, and I currently have a 5-month-old baby, a lot of this really resonated with, for me, the experience of of having a baby, you know, the sleepless nights, the feeding something, the weighing it all the time, and then the feeling when you send them off to school and you watch them go, it's like that moment where she lets the hawk fly. So I think there's something in that. Then she says, but I was orphaned, which of course isn't true. It's just her father she's lost. And I think there is something in the fact that she, although it is such an outpouring of herself, it's not always totally accurate or reliable. She's a slightly unreliable writer, unreliable narrator, I should say. I thought it was interesting. But then much more interesting than all of that is this idea that she was trying to rebuild herself. And this, you know, being knocked down by grief and to have to start again and to have to kind of regrow, rebuild yourself. Something that I should say I've also, a year ago, lost my mother. And I think there's definitely something in that, trying to, in coming to terms with the grief, you have to kind of grow through it, I suppose. And this idea that she rebuilds herself as the hawk, and in some way maybe she becomes the hawk, or certainly she would like to. So much more I could say, but I don't want to run out of time. So I suppose the only other point I should make is that I felt this was a very tangled, knotty book, which I don't mean pejoratively, you know. I felt like it was almost like going into a thicket of brambles, which she does sometimes when she's chasing after the hawk. You're really sort of stuck in there with all the mess, all these different strands. You can see my postcard here. It's like really messy. Everything's kind of interlinked and you can't easily pull bits apart. And I suppose I felt that maybe that was, for her, part of the reason for writing the book, was getting into the nitty-gritty and trying to... She writes about a hawk as something that flies free and soars above it all, and she compares it to the view from an aeroplane. This kind of hawk, sorry, just pressing that. This hawk's eye view, I suppose. So maybe she's kind of taking us into the thicket, and we hope that once we come out the other side, we can look down on it from above. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for watching this. I'm so sorry about the terrible lighting and everything. It's the end of the day. It's the only moment I had once all the kids are asleep. Yeah, do leave your comments in the section below. I'd love to hear what you think as well. Thanks. So here we are, gathering at the beginning of our walk on Hampstead Heath. And you can see us here walking along, deep in conversation. And this is where we'd stopped, waiting for some people to catch up. And just after this, I read out the long passage that I read out on the webcast. You can see we all had so much to say. Although we'd stopped walking, we certainly didn't stop talking. And there we are. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the video.